Good morning, everyone. Feels good to be in a room and presenting. I haven't done this in a while, so we may be a little rusty. Thanks for having us today. My name is Brenda Mackey, and I'm here with Andy Sauer. Andy and I have worked together for years.
A lot of years, yes.
And all of that in stormwater. So we have a lot of experience in seeing how humans and being those humans that have impacted the land. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is try to kind of bring that full circle for our conversation here over the next 2 days. So we're going to start by that process. How do we impact the land? And then in turn, how does that land impact the water? Now, we're going to bring that even, I think, full circle and show how that water then goes back and impacts the land. And as part of that, we're going to talk about the risks that we are mitigating, or are we mitigating them? Are we just passing those downstream? And then we're going to, that final third of the presentation, we're going to talk about why this continues. So we're recognizing that we're impacting the land and it's not always a positive impact. How can we make some change? So I was doing dishes this weekend. And I looked in the sink, and there was a bowl of mini wheats that didn't look like this. It actually looked more like this, and it was really dried out and stuck on the bowl. And I got to thinking, I'm like, wow, these mini wheats really do act like a watershed. So think about that. Before we develop a watershed, before we change that land, we have vegetation, we have trees, we have rocks, soil, and it's all there, and it's using the water as it falls on it, right? It's absorbing it. Now, we do have some that's running off, but there's a lot of absorption, infiltration, evaporation that occurs. Now, oftentimes when we start to change the land, whether that's a greenfield development or a redevelopment project, what's the first thing we do? We strip it all away. Not always, but that's very common, right? We go in because we're going to change the use of this land, all right? And we might put back in a few mini wheats, maybe some Cheerios, pick your favorite cereal. We're going to try to mimic what was there before, but do we ever really do that? So that's one thing I think to think about over the course of today is Andy and I aren't up here saying we shouldn't develop, because we know we're going to continue and we're going to continue to grow. We'd like us to just consider the way we're developing and think about those processes, standards, and the infrastructure that results from that. So how does our land develop? I think it's important to know and understand the processes that occur if you're not familiar with those. So to get us all on the same page, I thought we'd talk about that. So typically you have two teams of folks that are working. You have the development team, and typically that's your investor, the person that's putting the money into the development, right? You have your surveyor, engineer, designer, landscape architect that are forming what this development looks like. And you have your contractor who's going to build those improvements, right? Then you also have your city or agency team. You have your planning staff. You have your public works staff. You have your public safety staff. Both of these teams are developing this land via code of ordinances, design criteria or standards, and ultimately they're trying to get a permit so they can develop this land. So they're trying to meet this expectation that's set in these documents. Oftentimes our development starts in our planning departments with a planning review. So on the left of the screen, you'll see that's just a common plat overlaid on a green field. So this is where we can start to see how that land is going to change. A lot of times our review at this point, at least from a stormwater perspective, is very minimal. We're looking to see, what existing systems are out there. Where are floodplains, if those are near the property? Are we going to have detention on the site? Is detention required even? And if so, where should I put an easement for that on a plat? So from a stormwater perspective, that review is pretty minimal. We're really looking on how we want to use that land and making sure our access and systems are going to fit that land use need. Once we go through that planning review process, then we're in trying to get a permit. And this is where that real engineering review comes into play. So typically engineering plans are submitted. This is for transportation aspects of the project, a building, and for stormwater. So at this point, on the right of the screen, you can see blue overland flow paths that are going through this development. This is how water was naturally moving over the land. You can also see where we're starting to change that movement. So those red lines, those maroon lines, that's showing where we're enclosing those paths. So humans are going to start to try and control the way water is moving through this development. The other thing that we can see here is that our impervious area is going to change. So this is showing lots of lots that are going to have buildings on them at some point. So we're moving from having a lot of mini wheats to store water on this land to a lot less. That impervious area is going to change, which is going to change our stormwater runoff on this site. As part of that, I'd like to expand a little bit more on how we're changing the route that the water takes. So I talked about we're enclosing those overland flow paths. So if you take a look on the right of your screen, that's a small sub-watershed within a larger one. That red line is a pipe system that we built with the street. The blue line is the overland flow path. So the red line is what we thought we control. That was the easy thing to build, is to enclose a system to capture the water that's getting to the street, assuming it's all getting there. There's always going to be a bigger storm that gets to that natural overland flow path and makes its way downstream, which kind of begs to question, when we start to develop, what should we be building as part of our stormwater infrastructure versus preserving? So think long-term here. Is it more economical for a city to preserve that overland flow path and try to get the water there, or to try to reroute it and control it? Related to that, we're also changing the timing of how water is moving through the system. So once it hits an enclosed system, typically that's a pipe, right? Concrete, plastic, whatever it may be. Think about how water moves over that surface versus even a lawn, grass. It's different, right? It's that more efficient system that Seth was talking about. So as an engineer, we try to calculate that time. We try to estimate it. And how does that really impact our designs? And so I thought to discuss this even more, I'd show you an example. All right? So homeowner, orange star here. They've got an overland flow path that's just to the west of this house, and water is moving basically from the top of your screen to the bottom, so from north to south along that overland flow path. This house, this system has been here since the 60s, okay? So it's been around a long time. So as water's moving downstream back in May of this year, we had a decent rainfall event. It was a 2-year event, and the homeowner sent us this video. Never seen water like this before, running between their houses. This must have been some type of event. It's running fast. There's a lot of water here. It is on the overland flow path. If we zoom out a little bit, you still see that orange star there on the bottom right. See where those overland flow paths are coming from. So we have about 60 acres of land that's draining to this point, and it has been draining to this point, always. Over the last year, we've been building improvements on this system. So this 2-lane road that was a ditch section is now curb and gutter with a pipe system, okay? And then we've connected that pipe system to this existing culvert between this homeowner's house and the adjoining property. We designed that. We designed this system to get to that point in 10 minutes. That is per the standard, okay? The water's doing exactly what we designed it to do. So what was it before? Did we look at that? I ran through some calculations just to see, okay, if we hadn't put that pipe system in, what was the system doing before? The water was getting there in around 35 minutes before that system was built. We've changed how this watershed was connected and made it more efficient. We've passed that risk downstream, but we've built new improvements, we've developed.
Okay, I get to take over now and talk a little bit about the storage. So we tried to we'll use our cereal bowl here to detain, retain, right? And we've all seen all these facilities, how we're going to capture that storage, because we're changing, once again, we develop land, that volume of water. And we're going to talk a little bit today about the volume side and how, from my perspective or my technical opinion, a lot of our design standards are doing the opposite of what we should be doing. We're worried about that very large infrequent event, which is important if we're thinking about a dam or a reservoir, but when we're doing stormwater management for development or up in the watershed, I think we need to think about this a little bit differently, and that's what we're going to talk a little bit about. So on volume side, where is that volume going? Well, we try to do detention. In our urban areas with retrofit, this picture on the left is a little hard to see, but that's actually a very large underground vault as part of a development. So you see a lot of these vaults going underground, all in this attempt to, how do we, quote unquote, mimic Mother Nature, but a lot of these design standards are for a very large storm. And so are we really getting the value? And we'll talk a lot about value. Seth talked about it a little bit, and we'll talk more tomorrow when we have another presentation about that value. But how do we make these function more like it did before? How do we get that bowl of Wheaties back, right? How do we do that? So if we think about that, there's Brenda's bowl of Wheaties. She's good at the visualization, so she keeps me on my toes with these presentations. And then we're trying to, maybe we don't have the Wheaties, so we're going to use Cheerios, right? So Cheerios aren't as absorbive. So if we put water in these two, the Wheaties, as the natural environment, would have absorbed that more. We would have had more of that vegetation, all those things that really use and maintain that water on site. Cheerios is kind of that storage detention, right? We're getting some detention, but if we poured out the water from these two bowls, the water coming out of the Wheaties bowl is going to be far less than what's coming out of that Cheerios bowl, right? So we're retaining it, we're delaying it, we're slowing it down, but in many cases, all that volume is still in our watershed, and we're routing that down, where previously in the Wheaties bowl, Mother Nature is using it at the site. That's really what we're talking about here today. So what does that look like when we develop land, right? We add those impervious areas that Brenda talked about, roads, streets, driveways. Especially if you look at the new developments, everybody's got a 3-car garage now, so the driveways have gotten huge. And so we got a lot of impervious area. We've reduced that vegetation cover, and we've reduced that surface storage. That bowl of Wheaties now isn't there anymore. It's that hard bowl, and we get a lot more runoff, a lot more volume. So, me being the guy that likes to say, well, why? Well, how does this really happen? Seth talked about, the question was good. How do we communicate this? This is a very difficult subject to talk about. Development of land, like Brenda showed, how does it really happen? Okay, I'm going to take 160 acres. A developer doesn't go out there typically and do the whole 160 acres, right? He does like maybe 40 at a time. He might have a preliminary plat for either. So it's almost like a death by 10,000 cuts, right? We're all along the way, we're getting permits, we're getting reviews, but if we really take a step back and say, what actually happened to this land from point A to all the way Z? So at point A, I got 160 acres. I apologize for my poor kindergarten graphic here. The dark green area is all a heavy wooded area. On the right, I have some pasture in good shape, and I have some brush and grass. So at the bottom there, I have a calculation just using TR55, curve number method. Very used a lot in design, obviously. And so my curve number is a little less than 58. So what happens? Okay, the first 40 acres gets developed. He's changed it to single-family residential, and now my curve number has gone up to 64.5. What I've focused on here for you today is I want to talk about two sides of this volume curve. One on the side of a 1.5-inch rain. And I looked at all of Bentonville's rainfall data, and actually, if you actually look at 1 hour rainfall totals for this area, 1.4 to 1.8 inches of rain over an hour period is 90 to 95% of all events you guys have seen down here since then. So I think we need to sometimes concentrate on these lesser, more frequent events, and are we controlling that volume? Because I'll show you why here in a second. So if you look at the volume, in pre-existing conditions when it was undeveloped, 0.002 acre feet. When I developed the first 40 acres, I've already changed it three orders of magnitude. That volume from the 1.5 inch rain now has gone up to 0.36 acres. But what do we typically design to? That larger detention, that 5-6 inch storm, right? We've got to retain that. Do we really control that more frequent event? Okay, what happens next? Develops the next 40 acres. Once again, look at what happened to my 1.5 inch storm. It's now up to 1.3, another order of magnitude increase. I developed the next 40 acres, now I'm up to 2.4. And finally, we've developed the whole site over the last 10 years, and now my site that had very little runoff for a 1.5 inch rainfall event now has almost 5 acre feet of volume coming off it. That's what I see, that's what I've worked with. A gentleman at Colorado State, Larry Rosner, you may have heard him, he looked at this topic many years ago. The energy and the potential energy we have in these smaller events that happen more frequently are what really tear our streams apart. And that's why LID and green infrastructure is so important. We can control those smaller, more frequent events. It's more resilient, it's more healthy, but our design standards that we'll talk about a lot in the next couple of days are focused over here on the very extreme events. Can we reach a balance? Is there a better way to do it? Is basically what we're presenting here today. Okay, graphically, how does this look? The same information I just presented to you on a graph. Along the bottom are the rainfall amounts from 1.5 up to over 6 inches. And you can see over time how the volume has increased. And we look out there to the far right, and you're like, wow, Andy, that volume's gone up a lot. But remember, those 1 to 1.5 inch rain events happen much, much more frequently. What do we look at this as a percent change? The graph switches completely. I had to put this on a log graph for it to actually show up. Okay, on the left for the 1.5 inch, that percent change between there is 100,000%. So that volume is increasing so much dramatically over the natural condition. So it's actually opposite of what we think. The knee of the curve, right? A lot of infrastructure we try to put in more at that knee of the curve. Where should we be maybe focusing more of our retention LID practices? Where do we get a better bang for our buck? It's about that 1.5 to 2 inches of rainfall detention, okay? What does that look like? And this is maybe a nerdy way to look at it, but you know, I'm trying people, so give me feedback if you think this is a stupid idea. I'm fine with it. So I took 36 years of rainfall data from here in Bentonville, and I did TR55 on 1 hour time and said, how much runoff has run off this 160 acre property over the last 36 years? Well, if it was undeveloped, I would have 343 acre feet of development. Over 36 years, that's all the runoff I would have gotten. Under that development I just showed you, 3,432 acre feet. How much weight of that? How much does water weigh, right? A little over 8 pounds a gallon. That's tons. So on the right now, we have 4.6 million tons of water potential. That's how much the site is now leaving the site. And if I think about the potential from your old science days, if my development downstream or the stream is 10 feet lower than my development, that water that extra volume that I've created, just created 35,000 kilowatt hours. That's enough to power a home for 3 or 4 years. Just in that potential of additional volume of runoff. What if I'm a stream out here, poor streams? They see all that potential energy because we've changed the volume of water that's running off this site, and especially those smaller 1-2 inch storms. Those are the ones that are really impacting what we see out there. Okay, but just to summarize this, and we'll go on to a different topic here. Brenda talked about enclosing those flow paths. We're making it very efficient. We're adding impervious area. That's how we're changing things. We're controlling that routing. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, people. We designed to a 10-minute time of concentration, the water's going to get there in 10 minutes. That's what that energy that stream is seeing, and because of that, we're really degrading things. But how can we do better? We're trying to mitigate those, and how can we make these truly more living, natural type watersheds? I'll turn it back to Brenda.
So I thought it'd be good to walk through a few examples of, we've seen how the land can impact that water and the water movement, but how is that water then impacting the land? So we're going to go through a few examples here. I took this picture back in June at the IRWP workshop that we all went to, or a lot of us went to and did a tour of, because I thought it was amazing. Just the diameter of the rock that was on the bank, and hearing the landowner talk about how it hasn't always been this way. There's a lot more rock here than there was. We used to be able to use this all as pasture, use this land. So I went out to Google Earth. We have a lot more data now, right, that we can look back through the years. Because I was curious, and I grabbed the 2020 aerial that's there for this area, and I took that picture in the yellow circle there, looking downstream or towards the bottom of the screen. Look at that rock deposit. Okay, you can see it from Google Earth, and you can also see the rock deposits on the north side of 243. This is the Osage River. So let's step back through time. All right, we talked about development impacts. We saw how Benton County has developed significantly over the last 20 years. How has this changed? Okay, 2016, we're building a bridge here, but we already have the deposits. The rock's already there. 2014, some, not as much. 2010, I'm seeing some grass on that bank, not rock. 2006. 2001. 1996. It's pretty amazing to see that change over that period of time. And you know, with that development, it's controlled by standards, stormwater standards. And again, making our systems more efficient. So we're moving this downstream. And you see that coming off of systems like this picture.
Right, and even those pictures that Brenda just mentioned, showed a minute ago, it's not just the gravel deposit. Did you see the width, how that changed? How much wider that stream is getting? It's responding to that energy, right? We're bringing more energy through volume of water, the speed of that water. And you see this, you guys have seen this picture. We didn't install this culvert originally to be sticking out of the bank 5 feet and be 5 feet off the invert of this channel, right? This used to be a little small channel. This is 10 years later. You see this everywhere. And I ask a lot of public works directors, city officials, do your city have enough money to maintain it this way? I mean, this end section is going to fall off. We all deal with these problems. What we're here today to talk about is, do we really understand the why? That's really what we're challenging here today is, why is this happening? And if we can, you know, it's Einstein's definition of insanity, right? If we keep doing it the same way and expecting a different outcome, that's insanity, right? Well, why aren't we changing this? That's that tipping point that Seth talked about. How can we change, when we look at this, to change this type of thing from happening? So we see that. This is in where I live, a brand new con span that went in. You know, you spend money on this infrastructure, you come back 3 years later, the channel's widened, I've lost my head wall, I'm a public works director, I don't have money to fix it. I mean, these are all things that we're doing that don't make a whole lot of sense because once again, we don't understand the why is this happening with urban stormwater. You know, we see this in many cities. Banks are eroding, impacting homes, fences are falling into streams. This happened in less than 2 years. This is actually, since we're at an airport, near an airport, this is, they extended a runway of an airport, added a whole bunch of impervious area, put in a 60-inch squash pipe, and 2 years later, this stream looks like this. Things like that. Infrastructure that we have in our streams, wastewater lines, gas lines, a lot of them are next to streams. We're impacting them. Water quality, ponds, things. You see this and all this. Once again, this is what we're doing over and over the way we're designing. We're shortening those paths. when we shorten those paths, we pick up pollutants along the way, those hardened surfaces. And then when we do have a place where we have a larger pond or lake, we see these types of things happen. And this is my favorite example. As engineers, I'm guilty. I'm an engineer. I started out this way, drainage engineering. What do? We concrete line the channel. That'll make it better. It'll be sustained forever. Well, what happens when concrete fails, people? This is a trapezoid channel in Kansas City, Missouri. They put in concrete, and they did a rock wall behind a historical, this is Satchel Paige Stadium in Kansas City. Well, we made this, we have fixed this, right? Well, when the stream, water is a hard worker. She'll work forever. When the water finally cut through the bottom of this channel, the concrete channel failed on the bottom, this thing down cut, that little pool there is 22 feet deep now because it's a huge scour hole now. It impacted the side slope you see there, and that all happened in one storm. So once the stone failed, the bottom of the creek is out, the stone fails, that all happened in a 1-inch storm event. We got 1 inch of rain, and that stadium almost went into the creek. Because once all that hardened surface fails, you don't get just a small little problem anymore. You get a huge problem. This cost Kansas City, Missouri almost $1 million to fix, to save that stadium. Is that resilient? Are we doing the right things when we think about how we manage stormwater? And we talk about risk, and I hear this from public works directors and DOTs about, well, I need all those curb inlets, and we need to design this because I need to mitigate my risk. I can't have water on my road, and I understand that, but I think we need to have a balance because I think right now we manage risks from the upstream and we push it downstream. That risk isn't necessarily mitigated over the whole watershed. It's mitigated at that project site. Where does the risk go? We are actually just moving that downstream to others. And so what I would argue for is, can we mitigate risk more across the watershed? Can we be more holistic system-type solutions? So I think I might have went too far here, Brenda.
No, you're good.
Okay, project of the site and protect the system. So I said some of those things. So by the way, we didn't practice a whole lot. We apologize, but we're kind of just going through this. So. Is this yours?
I think so. Okay, so let's kind of pull this together. Why do we keep doing this? Okay. Wrong button. Here we go. All right. So as humans, right, we want to know our expectation. And that's true for a designer and a city or an agency. So that's why we have design standards. That way we know the expectation that we are there to fulfill. We understand the level of service that we're designing to. We continue to design to these standards. Now, the goal of our current stormwater standards and the way they were developed is to be efficient. It's really for a project level, for a property level, to reduce the risk to the property from flooding, so get water away, and to provide public safety, okay? And like Andy said, have we just passed this downstream? So I thought it'd be good to take a step back. We're gonna get a little technical here, but I think it's important for this group to understand why we design the way we do and where those variables come from. And it starts with our hydrology assumptions. I just went out and pulled a definition. So hydrology is not the same as hydraulics. Hydrology is the study of the properties, distribution, and effects of water on the Earth's surface. This is how we estimate how much stormwater runoff is coming off of our watershed and our lands. This is how we start to determine and calculate a level of service. And it really is tied to a rainfall intensity. And we're going to dig into this a little bit so that we all are on the same page on how much of an impact those assumptions on rainfall intensity impact what types of designs we are getting. What we want to talk through here right now is our design events versus our real events. So On the graph here on the left, you'll see intensity in inches per hour, that's rainfall intensity, time on the bottom, 24-hour period. This is a typical rainfall distribution that we design to, and we typically design our pipes to this peak intensity, 6 inches per hour, okay? So we assume that all the water is going to get to this pipe at one time, and that's how we start to size a pipe. So Andy and I were curious. We experienced a 100-year, what they called a 100-year storm in October 2018 in the Kansas City region, and it caused significant downstream flooding of Indian Creek, if you're familiar with that area. It was about 8 inches in 24 hours. We put an overlay of that distribution for that storm on this typical hypothetical event we designed to. That storm, the highest intensity we had during that storm was 2 inches per hour.
And I just want to point out here real quick, and what I see a lot of times, I go around the detention facilities, when you design a detention facility for that peak, you get very little value. So what happened here, it's a volume issue with this flood event we had in Kansas City. We got no control out of these facilities that were designed for that peak. If you see all those smaller intensities, hour 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the typical design detention in Kansas City had no impact on that. All that volume went through to the bottom of the watershed. Then we got more peaks later. And I'm sure a lot of your events around here happen the same way. Once again, how can we look at these different than just one peak storm event? It's very important to think about. That's the why.
So this is that same event plotted as points on the x-axis of this graph. And we're going to relate this back now to our timing. So how water, again, moves through the watershed. Remember that time of concentration assumption. So our hypothetical events, if I plug in a 15-minute time of concentration, look where that intensity is at. It's way above what that one event in 2018 looked like, or a typical event, okay? If I'm going to assume a 10-minute concentration, my intensity is a lot higher that I'm going to use to design that pipe. 5 minutes, it's even higher. So for a typical 10-year pipe that I'm designing, I am assuming intensities that are a lot greater than what I would typically see during a storm.
But now with NOAA, Atlas 14, the thing that I don't think we talk about enough with NOAA, with Atlas 14 that came out that Seth talked about, is for the first time you would get, as a designer, you have a range of events that are giving you the probability for. So for a 10-year level of service, I can go into NOAA Atlas 14 and I can look at everything from a 10% probability all the way up to a 90% probability. And they also put it in quartiles, quartile 1, 2, 3, and 4. Quartile 1 is what they recommend for smaller urban watersheds. So if you go in and look at Atlas 14, and I say as a designer, I want to provide a 10-year level service, but I know I'm in the upper part of a watershed. I know I'm in a smaller watershed, so I should do quartile 1. And do I really need to use the 90% probability, or is a median, 50%, enough for me to design my collection system? I'm not suggesting I'm designing a Corps of Engineers levee for this, but for a pipe size. If I assume a 50% using NOAA Atlas 14, look at where my intensity is now. I'm much more representing a more realistic pipe size specifically. I, a couple years ago, was talking with the director of KC Water about how we design wastewater treatment plants. And I asked him, I said, would you ever design a wastewater treatment plant for a peak discharge? And he's like, well, no, that's crazy. We could never afford to have a wastewater treatment plant to treat a peak, right? Why do we do it everywhere in stormwater for collection? We put in bigger and bigger pipes. What was that? Have a response out there? We're trying to mitigate that risk, right? We're so worried about that risk of getting that one event that happens. So what I want to do now is just, once again, I do have some out-of-the-box ideas, so feel free to yell at me later. That's fine. I can handle it, because I think we need to think about things a little differently. So if you're not familiar with how a lot of stormwater designs happen, it's very complicated. It's a formula developed by a civil engineer out of New York in the year 1889. Okay? I'm not saying 1989, that's 1889. He came up with a little idea called it was rational to assume that the peak intensity of a rainfall event should lead to the runoff rate. Hence became the rational method that we all still use in a lot of our designs, which is based on rainfall intensity, the area of the drainage, and a runoff coefficient. Any fourth grader in Bentonville should be able to do this calculation. I take my acreage times my intensity times a C, and I get a Q. Okay, that is how 90% of our stormwater infrastructure is being designed at the site level. And I wish I was kidding, but that's really where it is with a lot of things. We need to increase that understanding. Okay, so I took 10 years of actual, this is a tipping bucket rainfall gauge, so I could get intensities on a very short time frame. It took 10 years of intensity. So, of course, typically, we'd be designing up there between that 7 and 9 inches per hour. But I said, okay, that's what we typically would do. What if we did a knee of the curve? What if I did for the 95% intensity? Oh, look, I'm down at 2.25 inches. What does the design look like now? Okay? There's my complicated equation, of course, and look at the difference in Q. I went from 160 now down to about 50 CFS. So I said, okay, what's the pipe size for those? Okay, my pipe size for one, the typical way is a 60-inch, that's 5 feet, 5-foot diameter pipe. I put this slide together for a University of Kansas sustainability class, so they were interested in the resources we use. How much concrete is going in this, how much energy used. So I pulled this out of another bigger presentation, so that's why that's in there. But essentially, if you look at it at cost, I'm a little over $326,000 for a typical city block, so about 660 feet, linear feet. What if I did that differently? Now I need a 36-inch pipe, pretty decent sized pipe. But once again, my cost has gone down and my resources have gone down. It's not as much concrete I'm putting in the ground. So I'm like, okay, I'm saving money. It's less expensive, right? 58% less expensive. So we're trying to, once again, what's that balance, that control versus nature? That's really what we're talking about with low impact development. How can we start to balance what we're doing, right? So I said, okay, here's my typical. If I'm a city official and I still want to have value for my city, what else could I get for about $300,000, right? Well, I can get my pipe. It's a smaller pipe, so I still have dedicated stormwater conveyance to get that flood flow out. May not happen as quickly, but I can also put in 4 bioretention cells on each corner. I could probably put in new sidewalks on both sides of the street to increase walkability. If you've talked to any residents in infill development, they want sidewalks, connectivity, mobility. And by the way, I still have money left over. I can put in 12 street trees too. And now I have still a less costly solution, but look at what my benefits are. I start to stack those benefits. To me, in my opinion, that value is higher. And do we really think about stormwater that way? Do we think about how we can increase that value to the people that live along this block? Okay, this is my final one, and then I'll let Brenda conclude it here. I hear this a lot. We're getting more rain. Is it really the rain's fault? Well, it depends, I think, where we are in the watershed. But the bigger question is this resilient sustainability question. What amount of excess rain can we afford to convey? Have you ever really thought about that way? How much can we afford to convey? That's a sustainability side. If we keep just putting in bigger pipes, all that's really happening is that we're routing all that volume somewhere. Somebody's going to feel the impact of that somewhere. When those rainfall totals get greater, like Brenda showed in that great little video, that homeowner had never seen that kind of rapid flooding until we connected it, until we made that path of water much shorter, much quicker, and then the homeowner's like, wow, this is actually a dangerous situation. Okay? And then this is what I talk about with stormwater. Seth said it well. We're at the little kids' table. We need to raise the expectations of stormwater design and the systems. My biggest goal of my career is to be at that same big kid table. Let's talk about stormwater like we do wastewater treatment plants and water treatment plants, shouldn't be given a design to your intern at your firm shouldn't be doing your stormwater calculations. We need to elevate that expectation to what stormwater designs are. And then finally, do we understand all the risks? And that's very important, as if we're going to do this, we need to be able to mitigate those risks across an entire watershed. And those are water resources risks, too, that I want to emphasize. And I think that's what a lot of us are talking about here. How do you maintain those natural resources? There's risks to them that Brenda showed in those pictures. Okay, I'll let Brenda wrap it up.
So development's not going to stop. So I would like to challenge this group to think about how we can start to make an impact to that. Are there things we can do to start changing the way we plan around our water resources and how we design them? Can we find that balance? What opportunities do we have to consider rain as a resource and not a waste product? Can we preserve our overland flow paths rather than try to control? As humans, we want to control. Can we let nature just take its course? When we do want to build a pipe, can we build it more for an everyday storm? Is that something we're okay with? And then can we protect our properties by keeping them out of those overland flow paths, so setting them back from our streams? So through the next 2 days, think about this. What can we start doing to make some of these changes to the way we change the land? Ultimately, we need a bowl of mini wheats combined with some Cheerios. And so how are we going to get there? Thank you all very much today. Appreciate it. I'm going to take any questions that you have.
Thanks, Brenda. Thanks, Andy. Any questions here in the room? Please come up to the microphone. I'm sure there are a few. I was really struck by the imagery, Brenda, that you showed on the Crawford property where there's that erosion. As I imagine many of you have been driving across that bridge, the old bridge, since they built the airport in 1998. I remember there was very little deposits across that field. And over the years, driving for the last 20 years to the airport, to and from, it's only grown. And I think it's an example of exactly what we're facing throughout the Illinois River watershed. I mentioned we're losing a foot a year. It's due to the conveyance of high volume events. It's not necessarily high precipitation events. It's actually a lot of smaller events, but higher energy events. And that's happening throughout the watershed. So I appreciate you presenting that and sharing it in a really visually powerful way. Questions? Any questions from online? Nothing in the room.
You can yell at me too, it's fine. You know, my crazy ideas sometimes.
Yeah, Carol.
Hello, great presentation. My question is, from a regulatory perspective, some of those gray infrastructures are required. So then how do you go about changing that regulation so that you can reduce the amount of Q that you're treating for and allow for that to actually happen? Like what do you guys suggest as a process of making that happen?
Yeah, it does become a balance. So those regulations, like Seth was describing, we've tried to layer over time to get this control. I think it's time we have to step back and stop treating this as a layer, because that's how they're being built. Like whether it's adding on a detention pond with some bioretention at a corner where we have some room in our development versus thinking about how it really integrates with the site. So I think our challenge is making stormwater design comprehensive, not just an add-on like what Andy was saying. So for example, when we look at a site has a parking lot. Is there a way we can drain that parking lot to medians? Is there an opportunity for trees? How can we integrate in stormwater infrastructure to the way we want to use the site? So make that multi-function versus having two separate design functions. So I think it's going to require us to take a step back and reevaluate the standards we're designing to, and help promote in our processes of design that we are looking at this as an integrated site versus just designing, say, for transportation and then just designing for stormwater needs.
Right.
It's going to take a while.
Exactly. I'll just build on that a little bit. Yeah, I see it as it's an add-on, right? We do detention or BMPs as an add-on to already doing our bigger pipe, and that's where you hear from developers, I can't save any money on my site. So we have to definitely take a look at our standards. They need to be more robust and comprehensive standards. So it's not easy. So in Kansas City, the APWA chapter that I'm the chair of the Stormwater Sustainability Task Force, we are embarking on that. We are going to try to take a comprehensive look at updating a regional stormwater standard for both quantity and quality all together and looking at that more holistically. And it's not going to be easy. A lot of this is also education. It's talking like this. I used to be the county stormwater engineer for Johnson County. When you're on the other side of the table, which many of you in this room may be doing, it's not easy there too. You need that standard as a way to be able to defend why you're doing that, right? So we need to have those tools, but have maybe some more flexibility in them. So when you have a developer that wants to do some of those things, like Brenda's talking about, you as a city or county official can say, oh yeah, that fits in our adaptive management design standard over here or something. So those are the types of ideas I think we need to start to get creative about. It is going to take effort, though. I'm not here to say it's easy, and it's the old adage, right? If it was easy, everybody would be doing it. So if we want to really have it done right, it's going to take some effort. It's going to take more than a fourth grade calculation using only the rational method to really get some comprehensive solutions around stormwater. I think if we do, in my opinion, then the water quality regulation side comes out of it, right? If I can mimic Mother Nature like the shredded wheat, I get water quality benefits out of it. It's not the driver. I'm doing it to be a sustainable site. If I do it this way, and if I slow water down, if I put it through a rain garden, I get water quality benefits. I once did a presentation to a city council, and I talked for like 15 minutes, and I purposely did not say water quality regulations the whole time. They actually accepted that ordinance and it passed because I made it more about benefits and value to my community. An outcome of doing it this way is I get water quality benefits. City councils and people don't want to hear about, I got to meet my NPDES Phase 2 permit. What do they hear? Dollar signs. Can't afford this. It's bad government. Federal government telling them what to do. City councils love developments like this with grasses and trees. That's the message. That's the side of this message. We can make these sites look more livable, more sustainable, more natural looking, and we get water quality benefits out of it. And so I think that's just that messaging side of, instead of beating the hammer that we have to do this because of regulation, why aren't we doing it because we want to make our community better?
Great. John, could you come up to the microphone, John? Thank you.
Who's doing a good job?
Who's doing a good job? Okay, well, I think everybody has room for improvement. There was one of my mentors, he's no longer an elected official, Ron Norris. She lives in the city that Ron used to be the manager of. City of Lenexa, Kansas, had a wonderful program. He called it Rain to Recreation. And the city of Lenexa, Kansas was doing a great job. Then they had Ron left, leadership changed. They're still doing a good job, but without that leadership, they kind of went down a little bit. So Lenexa, Kansas is one. Of course, Philadelphia, as a large urban area, is doing a lot of green. Portland, Oregon, DC Water is doing a lot more green for the District of Columbia. You see this more and more. Brenda did work in Columbus, Ohio. They've done more green. You see it more and more. But locally here, the one that I always hold up as the gold standard was the city of Lenexa, Kansas, because he connected stormwater management with recreation and was very, very successful. Very interesting program. So.
It's one program too. Interestingly, if you're interested in looking at stream setbacks, stream buffers, they had the western portion of their city developed a little bit later. And so before that really took off, they put into place a different stream setback policy and a preservation policy. and development has grown around the streams. And so it's been really interesting to see that progress. The trail system connects all the development along those stream buffers, and the property values out there have skyrocketed because you're backing up to green space, technically. But Lenexa has seen it as they're preserving that path, and stormwater can get downstream. And then they went on a more regional stormwater management approach with that too, and that's the recreation side. Right. It's kind of a neat program.
Any last question before we transition? Well, I would, first of all, thank you very much. We really appreciate it. Great insights. And I would challenge this group in this room to think about what Andy was mentioning earlier about every detention or conveyance project that's going in, that we see going in. Are we asking the question, can we save money and add in LID infrastructure for the ecological benefits as well as the people benefits in terms of recreation or trails or other things? So I know many of you are already thinking about that, but I think we all need to on a more conscious level. Thank you.